All right, so good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. My name is Jesse Hildebrand, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those who don't know, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. So today, I'm excited. We're joined by 4 classes from across the United States. I'm going to give them a chance to do a bit of a shout out before we introduce our speaker. So we have Mrs. Wisniewski's class, what grade are you guys? Grade 6 from Ripon, Wisconsin.
Hi.
We've got Mrs. Condon's grade 1-2s from Zachary, Louisiana. I love it. We've got Mrs. Jureka's. Are they here yet? No, we've got an empty classroom, Mrs. Jureka. He's going to come. Grade 2, Austin, Texas. And then we've got grade 12s, Mrs. Digby's class from Fairfax, Virginia. All right, of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speaker. We're joined live by Teresa from the Turtle Hospital in Marathon, Florida. So they rescue, rehabilitate, and re-release injured sea turtles. They educate the public. They do great work, and they are one of our most popular groups to join us. We've done 10+ hangouts with them. We always love having them. And so thank you so much for joining us again, Teresa.
My pleasure. We like being able to teach people about sea turtles. And so what we're looking at right now, these are some of our patients. These are some of our green sea turtles. And so most of these turtles have come in because they have what we call fibropapilloma tumors, which is a virus that the sea turtles get caused by water pollution. And the virus causes tumors to grow on their soft tissues, so around their neck, their flippers, their eyes, which makes it very, very hard for these turtles to see or to swim, which makes it very hard for them to eat. So these turtles have to come in. We do surgery. We remove those tumors. And then once they stay for a little while tumor-free, they build up an immunity to the virus, so then they're able to be released. So like this guy, this is Huckleberry. He was named after the rescuer's dog. It's typically the people that find the turtles that get to name them. But when Huckleberry came in, that's what he looked like. He was a mess. He had a tumor on his flipper that was a little bit over a pound, which is crazy because he was only 10 pounds when he came in. So he was tiny. But that tumor was a pound. He wasn't able to move that flipper at all. But now, he is doing awesome. He is tumor-free. He just has to stay for a few more months, so that way we can kind of keep an eye on him, make sure that those tumors are not going to regrow and cause him any more problems, and then he'll be able to be released. And so most of the turtles that are in this pool are on a little bit of the smaller side, because sea turtles in the wild are solitary. So if you ever happen to see one when you're out there on a boat on the ocean, you're just going to see one turtle here, one there. You're not going to find them traveling in groups. So it's something that the movie Finding Nemo got wrong. Is that they don't meet their parents. They don't go traveling the currents together. So when we do need to put the turtles together when they're here, then they'll just ignore each other. So they'll steal food from each other, they'll knock into each other, but they're not being mean. They just don't care. And so we do try to keep them separated at least a little bit by size. So everybody in here are all kind of under like 50 or 60 pounds. So kind of a much smaller size. Kind of give you a reference. Whereas our other tank, which we'll see in a minute, are much larger turtles. But most of the turtles in here are green sea turtles. And so the green sea turtles get their name not because they're green, because they're brown, but because they're vegetarian. They're herbivores. So in the wild, they eat lots of seagrass and algae. Here, they get romaine lettuce, kale, green peppers, green stuff. And they eat so much green stuff that their fat, their insides, turn green. So it's kind of like you are what you eat. Just be glad it doesn't work that way for us, because we'd be all kinds of different colors. But even though these guys are all the same species, there is a very wide color differentiation. So some of them are a little bit darker. So like Marvin, he's a very dark turtle. And then some of them are a little bit lighter, like we also have George and Corey. And that's mainly just genetics. But the green sea turtles are also one of the prettier of the turtles. They have a very, very pretty pattern on their shell. But no two turtles look exactly the same, so each one is just a little bit different. But you can't use a pattern on their shell like a fingerprint, because as these turtles grow up, as they get bigger, that pattern is going to warp, it's going to change. They'll still be pretty, it'll just be a different kind of pretty. So it makes it kind of unique. But the green sea turtles are one of the more common species that we get down here, and unfortunately the tumors are one of the more common problems that we see. So most of these guys had those tumors. Most of them not as large as huckleberries, but some of them. But we also see quite a few boat strike turtles. So like this guy, this is Toby, also named after the rescuer's dog. But he was hit by a boat. So he's got that damage to the back of his shell. And so their shells are really amazing. Their shell itself is bone, which means that when it gets damaged by that boat, it will heal, but it will never fully regenerate. So it'll never look perfect again. He'll always have that little scar. And then the very outer layer of their shell is a keratin layer, so just like your fingernails. So when they're going through a growth spurt, the bone grows, so their shell grows, but that keratin layer sheds. It falls off. So that's why some of these turtles, like Toby, look kind of funny. They'll kind of both light and dark all at the same time, because that's where they've grown, and that top keratin has fallen off, yet that under keratin hasn't fully come in and hardened yet. Just like George. George is kind of the same way. And George was found by a guy named George. That's typically how we get most of our turtles, is from the boaters and the fishermen, the people that are out there on the water. So they see a turtle that doesn't look quite right, and then they call us. And so just like a real hospital, one of our staff is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So no matter when we get a turtle call, we can respond. And we've got a turtle ambulance and everything. Because you never know when you're going to get a sea turtle. But we are located in the Florida Keys, so the string of islands down at the very base of Florida. So we're surrounded by ocean. And it stays typically pretty warm down here all year round. And the sea turtles are reptiles, so they're cold-blooded. They get their body temperature based off of the water temperature. So they like staying down here all year round. So we get turtles coming in all the time. Every year we typically average about 100 turtles. And then most of the time we're able to release about 70-75%. But of course it all depends on what's wrong with that turtle as to how long they need to stay. So like the turtles that come in with the tumors are typically here altogether about a year. But we do sometimes have turtles that need to stay forever. So like Sam, the big guy here, well, big for this tank. Sam was hit by a boat. He has what we call bubble butt syndrome, which is what happens when they get hit by a boat and air gets trapped underneath their shell. But we can't get rid of that air. The turtle can't get rid of that air, so the turtle ends up floating. And floating in a sea turtle is not normal, because they eat at the bottom, they sleep at the bottom, they do everything at the bottom. So when they are stuck up at the top, they really are stuck. And so we can't fix this floating problem, so we cannot release them. They become what we call a permanent resident. But to make it a little bit more comfortable for them while they're here, we'll attach lead weight to the outside of their shell. So Sam's got 2 gray circles on his butt. Those are weights, so that way when he wants to, he can go down to the bottom and go to sleep. Those weights fall off, so then they're back to floating again. So even with the weight, they still cannot be released. But most of our permanent residents are permanent because of bubble butt. That's why in our larger tank here, or larger turtle tank, most of these guys have bubble butt. And so one of our larger turtles is this guy. This is Hanson Bowie. About 240 pounds. She's a big girl. She's a turtle that we're not quite completely sure yet if she'll need to stay. She only has been here since July, so we're still giving her medications to clean up an infection. But she does have damage to her shell, most likely from a boat. So if after we get the infection cleared up, if she's still floating, then we can say, okay, that floating's due to the boat strike. She's got bubble butt. But she's a very large turtle. But even as large as she is, she's not fully grown. Green sea turtles can get to be up to about 500 pounds. Shell length up to about 5 feet long. So she's still got some growing to do. Sea turtles are kind of unique. They never stop growing. So the older the turtle, the larger they are. And that's the only way that you can guesstimate their age, is based off of their size. To determine their sex, to determine if they're boys or girls, you have to wait until they get a little bit bigger. They get to be adult size, so about 25 to 30 years old. Then if they're a boy, they get a long tail. So April here, he's growing a nice long tail. So April is a boy. Whereas turtles like Hans and Bowie that are huge, but she doesn't have a tail, so Bowie's a girl. And that's how we sometimes end up with turtles with the wrong names. Because April, typically our girl's name, but our April is a boy. Because when they come in, you don't always know if they're a boy or a girl. Because if they're a little bit smaller, you can't tell. And then we end up having to change their name sometimes. Or we just say April is our April Fool's joke. But they don't know what their names are. They don't care. They're not like dogs. They don't respond to their names. The names are really just for us. So that way we don't have to just give them a number and call them all numbers. It's not very nice. And sometimes the names are just really, really fun. So on the bottom here, we've got Montel. He is named after the talk show host because he came in with a lot of drama. So he's been hit by a boat, bit by a shark, entangled in fishing line, and he's had those tumors. So he's missing front flipper, all of his left front flipper, his right eye, and his shell is dented there on the left side. So he's had a hard life. So he's one of those few turtles that is a permanent resident, but does not have bubble butt. But in order to be released, a sea turtle needs at least 3 full functioning flippers. Montel only has 2.5 flippers and 1 eye. So he's just not very fast anymore. He wouldn't be able to get out of the way of a boat or a shark. But that's okay. Here, he doesn't have to worry about boats or sharks or anything like that. But when they only have 3 flippers, like Fran was bit by a shark. She's missing her left front flipper. She'll be able to be released. She just has to finish healing. But Fran is one of those turtles that originally came in as Francesco. And then we realized that Francesco was really a girl, so we shortened it to Fran. Most of our turtles up here in these 2 tanks right now, these are what we call our hurricane tanks. Because Hurricane Irma came through a little bit more than a month ago. And so one of the things of living in Florida, living in the Keys, is you kind of have to plan for hurricanes. You always kind of keep your fingers crossed and hope that you're not going to get hit with one, but it's better to plan and not need it than need it and not have it. So we have these 2 hurricane tanks. They're built up, they're about 6 feet deep, so that way, even if we get storm surge, even if we get flooding, the turtles in these tanks stay safe. And they're built up a little bit closer to the buildings, a little bit further away from the water, so they're a little bit better protected from the wind. And even if we do get storm surge, they're not directly on the water. Hopefully it'll kind of lessen by the time it gets to them. But the rest of our turtles are in our other enclosure in the back, which is located right on the water. One of the joys of living on an island is that we are surrounded by water, which it's fun most of the time, but not so fun when we get a hurricane. But some of our palm trees still look kind of pathetic because we got a lot of trees down, a lot of branches down, some poles down. A little bit of damage back here to our enclosure, but not that much. And so we've got our patients down here. And so these guys get their own individual tanks. So these are the turtles that are a little bit more sick. So they're not quite yet ready to go with other turtles yet or to go into the deeper water. So they get their own individual tanks. And so we'll meet Booga here first. Booga's come in since the storm. She's only been here for just a few weeks. She's a loggerhead sea turtle. The loggerheads get their name because they have a very, very large head. But she was found entangled in a crab trap. She was found 17 miles offshore by a fishing boat called Booga Man. And so they named her Booga. But we had to do surgery. We had to amputate her right rear flipper because that crab trap, the line of it was entangled so badly around her flipper that it had damaged the flipper. We weren't able to save it. So she'll be with us for 2 months, long enough for that wound to heal and for her to adapt to only having 3 flippers, and then she'll be able to be released. But for right now, she's only in about a half a tank of water, so this way she can rest, she can sleep, and she's not going to tire herself out too much. And then once she starts healing up a little bit more and feeling a little bit better, we'll start moving her to some of the larger tanks. Because it all depends on the turtle and what's wrong with them as to what we need to do. So she was entangled. Sometimes they do have multiple problems. So like Freddie, another loggerhead. Freddie was bit by a shark, so she's missing her left front flipper. But she was also hit by a boat. So she also has damage there to the back of her shell. So she's still healing. She needs some more time. But she likes to hang out right there where the water comes in because it feels pretty good. It's like the jet of a hot tub. Because they do have nerve endings throughout their shell. So they can feel things on their shell. Think about you rubbing your fingernail. How you can feel that? Well, that's what the sea turtles feel. And so sometimes we'll also give them toys in their tank. We'll give them PVC pipe structures, so that way if they want to hide or rub their shell, they can. And then last but definitely not least, we also have some babies. And so it is technically still nesting season. Nesting season is May through October. And so being at lots of nests. And so each nest has about 100 eggs, and it takes about 50 to 60 days for those eggs to hatch. But they're supposed to hatch out in the middle of the night. They crawl to the ocean, and then once they are in the ocean, they swim offshore. They hang out for the first few years offshore, like 30, 40 miles out there. They'll either hang out in the floating seaweed beds or kind of bounce from one to the other. So every year we get some babies, the ones that don't make it out that far, or don't make it to the ocean. But since the storm, since Hurricane Irma, we've gotten a lot of babies in, a lot of what we call post-hatchlings. So between like a month to 4 months old. These are the turtles that, because they were offshore, kind of floating, when the storm came in and pushed all of that water in and it changed the currents a little bit, pushed all that seaweed in, it pushed the babies in with it. Because the older turtles, the bigger guys, they know that when a hurricane's coming to hunker down, kind of stay at the bottom, so that way it doesn't happen. But the babies are little. They haven't figured that out yet. They've barely taught themselves how to dive. So we're still finding babies near shore, stuck in people's canals or marinas, just because they can't make it that 30 miles offshore, because 30 miles is a long way when you're tiny. But let's see if we can grab him. So he's a very small turtle. This guy's probably about 3.5, 4 months old. He's a baby green sea turtle. And so the green sea turtles, they look very different between baby and adult, or baby and juvenile. So at this age, they're black on the top, and they're white on the bottom. It's what we call counter shading, because it's how you can camouflage to open ocean. Because when you're out in the ocean, you look down, it's very dark, so their tops are dark. But if you're under the ocean and you look up, it's very light, so their bellies are white. And then they also have a little white outline around the edge of their shell and around their flippers to help break up that sea turtle silhouette. And then once they grow up just a little bit more, that's when they move more near shore to the seagrass beds, and that's when they get to be more brown with that very pretty pattern on their shell, which is much better camouflage for them in the seagrass beds. Just like you get tigers and leopards and cheetahs have stripes and spots. So that way they can blend into the grasses. Plus they're babies and they're just adorable. Okay, we want to do some questions?
Yes, we do, and thank you so much for that. Teresa, I have to ask first, do you love turtles? It shows it's pretty good.
You kind of have to love turtles to work at the turtle hospital.
Of course. Also, I love the pose that the turtle takes when you pick him up. That was great. All right. Let's start with Mrs. Wisniewski's class. If you guys have a question, come on up.
She's coming up right now.
Hi, you have turtle specialists that do surgeries or just marine vets?
Well, the people that do our surgeries are veterinarians. So they went to vet school, but typically in vet school they teach you dogs and cats and the normal animals that you would see on a day-to-day basis. So if you do want to become a sea turtle vet or a marine animal vet, then you have to find, like you go through vet school, you get your veterinary license, and then you find somebody like our vet to study under. Because to a certain extent, wound care and surgery is pretty similar, no matter if you're working on a human, dog, cat, turtle. But sea turtles do make it a little bit trickier, just because they are reptiles, and anything that we do, we have to make sure they're able to do, or that the turtle's able to go into water afterwards.
Great question. All right, let's go to Mrs. Condon's class. If you guys have a question, come on up.
Hey, Robert. All right, Robert, ask your question. What are sea turtles?
Say that one a little bit louder.
A little bit louder.
What do sea turtles prey? What do sea turtles eat?
What do they eat?
Well, it depends on what kind of turtle they are. So like the green sea turtles are herbivores. So they eat seagrass and algae. The loggerheads, like Booga and like Freddy, are carnivores. So they're going to eat crab, lobster, conch. That's one reason why they have such a large head. And I'll show you Stoney's head, because Stoney's head is huge. Stoney's about 200 pounds. He's got a massive head. So most of that head space is taken up by muscle. And they have a very strong, thick beak, which is what allows them to bite through the crab and the lobster. Because it's not exactly easy. I don't suggest you try it. He was bit by a shark, so he's healing.
All right, great answer. Let's go to Mr. Dureka's class in the library. Go for it. Yeah, you're good.
Can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
What do you feed baby sea turtles at the hospital?
What do you feed baby sea turtles at the hospital?
Well, the babies are a little bit more omnivores. So in the wild, they'll eat a little bit of everything. So they'll eat little bits of seaweed and seagrass, plus little fish and shrimp and crab, kind of anything they can get their little flippers on. So when they're here, they'll get, we can give them little tiny bits of lettuce or little tiny bits of squid. And then we also have a special, it turns into a gel that we can freeze for them. So that way they get some extra nutrients as well.
Excellent question. All right, on to Mrs. Digby's class.
Hi. I had a question about how long it takes to rehabilitate the animals and get them adjusted to ocean life once you like find them out in the ocean and they're like hurt or they're babies.
Well, it all depends on how they're sick as to how long it takes to get them better. Just like for people. It takes you longer to get over a broken arm rather than a cold. So turtles like Stoney's been here since the middle of July. But he was in pretty rough shape when he first came in, because that shark bite, or that shark, had gotten bits and pieces of all 4 flippers. He had scratches on his head, scratches on his back. So we've got him mostly healed, but he's still got a little bit of infection still in his right front flipper. So he'll probably still need to stay for at least another month or 2. Whereas some turtles, like Drifter's only been here for just a couple weeks, another loggerhead that came in after the storm. She was found entangled in fishing line. So she was kind of lucky it didn't damage too much that we had to amputate or do surgery, like with Booga. Physical therapy, then we do some laser therapy, because our flippers are still just a little bit swollen. So she'll probably need to stay for only about another month. But we don't care how long it takes. We will keep that turtle until they're completely healthy. Because you think about it, once we release these turtles, they're not ever going to come back. So if we release them and they're not completely healthy yet, they're not going to come back for a checkup. So we have to release them knowing that we're never going to see them again.
Excellent. All right, so while you were talking, we had 2 other classes join us. We have Mrs. Shiflett's and Mrs. Webb's class. Before I go to them to ask a question, we do have one from a group online, which is, what's the oldest sea turtle you have at the hospital?
Well, the oldest sea turtle would be our largest sea turtle. Hanson Bowie would probably be one of them, because we've got a loggerhead and a green that are right around that 250-pound mark, so probably close to about 40 to 50 years old. An average lifespan for a sea turtle is about 80 to 100 years old. Because even though Stoney here is about 200 pounds, he's a big turtle, it's probably only about like 30 to 40 years old.
Excellent. All right, so Mrs. Webb's class, if you want to come up, you just have to use your own microphone. Just go to the top of your screen, the microphone symbol, and then go right ahead.
How many different kinds of turtles do you guys have there?
We have 3 different species here. We primarily get the loggerheads and the greens because those are the most common of the sea turtles, at least here in the Florida Keys. We also have one Kemp's Ridley, but she's kind of stubborn. She likes to hide. She's kind of shy. But then the other 2 species found around Florida are the hawksbill sea turtle and the leatherback sea turtle. But we don't see them very often.
Excellent. All right, so Mrs. Shiflett's class, if you guys want to come on up, again, you have to demute your own mic, but you're good.
What happened? Hello.
Lila, come on up.
Lila.
On the baby sea turtle, what are the numbers? Like, he had 2 numbers on him. It was like 21 and then another 21. What did they do?
Well, that's how we can tell the babies apart. Because, like, in this tank, we only have the 1 baby. Because when they came in after the storm, some of them had gotten introduced to, like, a fungal infection. So some of the turtles were still keeping by themselves, at least the babies. But some of them we can put together, and they all kind of look identical. So when they're babies, it's very, very hard to tell them apart. And so the way we fix that is we put a little number on their shell. Like even the green sea turtles, but even when they're older, they're sometimes a little bit difficult. So we will use a paint pen. But these guys were too small to use the paint pen. So for these guys, we've even used a nail polish pen. So it keeps it, so that way we know who everybody is.
Little did you know that nail polish could be used for turtle painting as well. All right, let's go back.
Well, it's nice and safe. It's not going to hurt the turtles.
Yeah. Let's go back to Mrs. Wisniewski's class. If you guys have a second question.
Are there such things as turtle poachers? If yes, what is being done to stop them?
Well, yes. Like sea turtles, they are an endangered species. Depending on what kind of turtle they are, depends on exactly how endangered they are. So like the green sea turtles and the loggerheads are considered threatened, but the Kemp's Ridleys, Hawksbill leatherbacks are all still considered critically endangered. And in the U.S., at this point, we don't have that much of a problem anymore. We've been protecting these turtles since the 1970s. But in other countries, sometimes it is a very, very large problem. So in some areas, especially in Mexico and like Costa Rica, like throughout Central America, what they will do is once that turtle lays her eggs, they have people on the beach at night. They will dig up the eggs and bring them to a more protected area of the beach, or they will actually put them in an incubator. And so it helps protect the eggs from poachers and wild animals. And then once the little babies hatch, they'll sometimes raise them for about a month or two, let them get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, and then they'll release them right off the beach.
Great to hear that there's people all around the world doing stuff for turtles. That's awesome, Teresa. All right, Mrs. Condon's class, if you guys have a second question, come on up again.
Did you lose any of the turtles at the hurricane?
Say that one a little bit louder.
Did you lose any turtles during the hurricane?
Did you catch that, Teresa?
I didn't quite get that.
One more time.
Ready. Did you lose any turtles during the hurricane?
We didn't lose any turtles during the hurricane. That's one reason why we did put all the turtles up top in the hurricane tanks, and even the ones that weren't strong enough to go in the hurricane tanks went inside the hospital into temporary tanks, because we know that our enclosure down here, because it is located directly on the water, that means that it floods, which is most of the time not a problem. And it's really nice because it's nice and pretty, and we're able to pull the water for these tanks right from the ocean here. But it also means that when we get a hurricane or super high tides, that it floods. And so something that most of you guys don't probably see very often, it's an iguana. We get wild iguanas that are just kind of everywhere throughout the Keys. But once we're able to fully clean out our main pool back here, because the main pool, this is where our permanent residents typically live, so they're not always up in those two large round tanks. Most of the time they're in here. But this pool ended up with a lot of debris in it, so we're currently working on getting all of that out, because we have to make sure that before we put turtles back in here that there's nothing that the turtles can eat. And so hopefully within the next couple weeks we'll be able to start. But the most important part was to get the individual tanks back up first.
Danny, I'm really glad we got a hurricane question in there, and you made a segue to iguanas too, for good measure.
Hey, we like all animals.
I believe it. Mr. Jureka's class, if you guys want to come up, go for it.
Can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay.
How often do you take the turtles out of their tanks?
How often do you take the turtles out of their tanks?
Well, it depends on the turtle. So if the turtle's pretty healthy, we're going to leave them alone for the most part. Just because when they're patients, we don't want them getting too used to people, because we want to make sure that by the time that they do get released, that they're going to ignore people and not hang around people, because that's when they end up getting hurt. But when they're sick, they need to get taken out sometimes every day or every other day, because it all depends on what kind of medications they need. So sometimes, especially we've got Kevin. So Kevin was bit by a shark, and so she's missing both front flippers. So now that her flippers are mostly healed, we've like lessened it down to like every 3 to 4 days that we're cleaning her or taking her out and cleaning her wounds, because they're mostly healed. And even at this point, there's not too much cleaning involved. We just need to check them and make sure that they're healing the way they're supposed to. But when she first came in and it was still very, very fresh, she was at least once a day. But these tanks get drained and the tanks get cleaned every single day. So typically, while that's happening, that's when we'll take care of the turtle as well. So that way we only have to do it once rather than a couple times.
Right. Excellent. And what a beautiful turtle. Mrs. Dickey's class, if you guys have a second question, come on up.
Do you guys have any other questions? Great, thank you.
Nope. Okay. Well, and while we're waiting, quick question from online, Teresa. Is a turtle's brain like a human's brain, and do they have a hippocampus?
Well, their brain's not exactly like ours. Their brains, first of all, is a lot smaller. Like an adult sea turtle's brain is only the size of your thumb. And instead of like being more like a ball, it's more like, and they don't need all the same brain function that we do because we're made to learn. We're helpless when we're babies. Sea turtles, on the other hand, all of their knowledge is instinctive. So from the moment they're born, they're on their own. Because once that mama turtle lays her eggs, that's it. She's done. She never sees those babies. So in that respect, they don't need a very large brain. They don't need to learn anything because they already know it all.
Excellent. All right. And we can do look up the hippocampus question later for that question. But for now, we'll go on to Mrs. Webb's class again. If you guys want to demute your mic and ask a second question, go for it.
What are the different kinds of tumors they get, and how do you cure them?
Well, it's really the main tumor. It's a fibropapilloma tumor. And it's caused by water pollution, or it's linked to water pollution. And we have to do surgery to remove the tumors.
Any others of any kind, or?
But the tumors typically grow on the soft tissues, so around their necks, their flippers, and it's not that the tumors are like cancerous, it's not that the tumors themselves are dangerous, but because of where they grow, they do become dangerous because then that turtle can't see or swim or eat.
Right. Before we go to the last question, I want to go back to Mr. Dureka's class because there's been a kid waiting like the entire time for a question, you can tell. So if you want to come up, go for it. Ask right ahead.
Can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
How many baby sea turtles make it out to sea when they're born if sunlight get eaten?
Well, that's one reason why the mama turtle lays so many eggs. It has about 100 eggs. So, because there's two ways to think about parenting. You either do like us, you have one baby at a time and you spend years and years taking care of them. Or you do like sea turtles where you have a lot of eggs but no parental care whatsoever. So that way, even on a good day, you only have just a few survive. But right now, with people and all of our problems that we bring to turtles, it's estimated that only 1 in 1,000 will actually make it to adulthood, because it takes them about 25 to 30 years to hit adulthood.
Right. So last but not least, and then I'm going to ask a question if it doesn't get asked here, but we'll go to Mrs. Shiplett's class. If you guys have another question, come on up and demute your mic and go right ahead.
How many sea turtles have not survived and didn't make it out to the ocean?
You mean like from a hatchling?
From the hospital.
From the hospital.
From the hospital.
Typically we're able to release about 70-75% of the turtles that come in. It does happen that turtles die just because we are a hospital. Sometimes they come in and they're so severely injured that there's nothing we can do to help them. But we always try. So like even when Kevin came in, because she's missing both front flippers, we didn't think she'd be able to swim. Because sea turtles, they use their front flippers for propulsion. So that makes them go. They use their rear flippers like a rudder. So we were thinking that we were probably going to have to euthanize her just because she wouldn't be able to function. But we always try, because sometimes they do surprise you. And even though right now we're keeping her in shallow water as she heals, hopefully we will be able to put her in some deeper water, because she is able to swim around a lot better than we were expecting.
That's a great story. Great not to give up. Okay, before we wrap up, I just want to ask, for the classes that are here, what can they do to help turtles, either at the hospital, in the wild? What can they do to help make sure the turtles don't get in this situation in the first place?
Well, one of the easiest things you can do, and it doesn't matter where you live, is to not litter. Because everything ends up in the ocean eventually. And so either these turtles will get entangled in it, or they'll try to eat it, thinking that it's food. And something that a lot of people don't always think about are balloons. Because if you let a balloon go into the air, it has to come down. And think about it. What does a balloon, or even a plastic bag, look like floating in the water? Looks like food. Looks like a jellyfish. So they eat it thinking that it's food, and then of course if you're ever at the beach or on the water, make sure you keep your eyes open, so you see a turtle, you're not going to hit it with your boat, and that you're not leaving anything on the beach that'll get washed back into the ocean with the next high tide.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Teresa. What we do for all the classes at the end is I'm going to demute the microphone of every single class. So Mrs. Wisniewski's class, Condon's class, Tereka, Digby, if you guys want to join me in saying a big thank you to Teresa. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. I didn't get to answer my question.
So, for all the classes, thank you so much for joining us. Teresa, that was wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we look forward to having you back soon for all the classes. We have lots of hangouts every month, so if you want to hear about anything else or come back to a Turtle Hospital hangout, we look very forward to having you back. Again, have a lovely rest of your day, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning by the seat of your pants.